Don't whine. The road to muscle gain is long and bumpy, and you've just begun. Tea time will only get harder from here.
I expect nothing less. Let's raise our teacups to strength.
To strength!
In Fire Emblem, characters have a number of different stats and data to consider when building units. Every character has base stats, or their initial starting stats when you recruit them. They also have growth rates, percentages that determine the odds of gaining more points in each stat when they level up, signifying their future potential. In Engage, there's also maximum stat modifiers, and these numbers modify a character's class stats ever so slightly to make them more individual. This way, characters in the same class do have a little bit of variety when it comes to their final, or maxed, stats. Etie is one of the earliest recruited allies in Fire Emblem Engage. She comes as a level 4 archer, and her bases are okay, but archers in general don't have the best bases in this game. However, I would argue that this is finally a Fire Emblem game where the early game archer is actually pretty good, perhaps even arguably better than the ones that come later. Etie is incredibly useful as soon as she arrives, coming strong enough to single-handedly shoot down the actually threatening Pegasus Knights, even on maddening difficulty, and she'll continue to be useful on any difficulty until at least Chapter 7 when Alcris shows up, and likely beyond should you continue to use her. We'll get to that. I've seen a lot of discourse online about Etie, with a lot of folks saying she's decent early game but falls off, or just that in general she's too frail and too slow to be a usable unit. And honestly, I couldn't wholeheartedly disagree more. I used her throughout the entirety of my first Maddening run, and she was consistently one of my better units. In all fairness, she did eventually have the Lin Ring on her, which goes a long way to making her even better, but I was never disappointed with Etie. It's true, Etie is frail and can be a serious liability on enemy phase in particular, but if you're letting enemies run up and attack your archer without a proper defense, then I don't think you're playing optimally, and much of Etie's growths can be patched up in specific classes. She will still struggle with build for the most part, but that could also be fixed by utilizing certain rings or engraves, or simply plopping her into a class with even better speed growths so that she eventually isn't as weighed down by her weapons. Right out of the gate, it's clear that Etie will have some issues with her speed stat, as it starts at a base of 6 and she's only got a starting 35% chance for it to increase upon each level up, without accounting for any modifiers from the class that you put her in. In Engage, each class will modify a character's bases and growths, allowing for you to tweak characters with problem areas somewhat, or double down on what they're already good at. As an archer, her starting class, Etie's growths are actually pretty solid. Archer does a decent job of improving her speed, she'll need 5 higher than enemies to double them, her dex, which she'll need for her accuracy and landing critical hits, and her other strong areas. But we can absolutely help it more via upgraded classes and their better modifiers. However, she can stay an archer until level 10, that's totally fine. In Engage, it's recommended to upgrade characters as soon as possible, because the upgraded classes have even better growth rates, allowing for better odds at good level ups. And you can always use a second seal to put them back into the same upgraded class, or any other class for that matter, and level them up infinitely. Characters also have internal levels, which will slow EXP gain over time as you keep doing this, so wasting time in base classes where growth rates are lower is never recommended. Etie's absolutely solid base strength growth makes up for her lacking speed somewhat, as she will definitely be hitting pretty hard. She has one of the highest base strength growths in the game at 40%, beaten only by Amber, Panette, and Rosado at 45%. Aside from her speed, Etie's other growth rates and usable bases can allow her to perform well in just about any physical class that you drop her into. If invested in, she has the capability of carrying you through the entire game and still coming out, at least strength-wise, one of the strongest units in your roster. She might not be the absolute strongest, but it's likely she will be in the top echelon, and this is her true calling. All of this, too, is without slapping the Lin Ring on her, which for many units absolutely fixes speed issues by giving the user Speed Taker. The Lin Ring also allows her to powerfully snipe across the battlefield via Astra Storm, grants her access to the very powerful Mulagir bow, and allows her to create enticing defensive doubles that enemies will love to target, since they'll likely be wielding bows and unable to counter their close-range attacks. The Lin Ring is a great pair for her in a lot of ways, but you can fix anyone with rings, and especially with the Lin Ring. On the other side of the fence, Etie does not have a lot of potential in magical classes, since her magic base stat and growth rate are both 0 at base, and to add insult to injury, she gets a -2 to her maximum magic. This makes her a considerably poor choice to go into magical classes, as the highest magic growth she could possibly achieve is 30% as a sage. Couple this with the fact that magic classes in general don't do much to raise speed growths, and you've got a slow and offensively weak mage here. It's not a good start, and a horrible handicap for her long-term potential in this area. Like just about anything in Engage though, you can definitely do it with enough effort, but I don't recommend it for her. Maximum stats-wise, it's about what you'd expect. Etie gets an extra +2 to strength and +2 to her dex, on top of whatever her class's maximum stats are, with a loss in magic, res, and luck. Personal skills aren't the end-all be-all in Fire Emblem Engage. They typically just add a little extra personality to units, especially should you have multiple characters in the same class, but unfortunately for Etie, she's got one of the worst personal skills in the game.
Unbelievable.
Energize gives her +2 strength if she heals herself with an item, like by using a vulnerary for example, which will happen throughout your playthrough. However, this strength bonus doesn't last long. Or should I say, doesn't last at all. It doesn't carry over through your next turn. It's basically for enemy phase only, unless Etie gets danced after using the healing item. By the time she can move again on your next turn, the +2 strength will be long gone. Is this entirely useless? No. You can squeeze some extra damage out of her during enemy phase if she's baiting enemies, and healing isn't the worst requirement to trigger it. But is this a good skill that you'll find use for often? No. It's just totally lackluster and too situational to really use. But at the end of the day, it is sort of a gag due to the fact that Etie likes taking strength supplements. I think it should have been a one-time buff throughout the entire battle, like a free strength tonic used on her that you could have on every map. Now that would have been much better. Perhaps they thought an effect like this on top of her already good strength though, would have been too good. Let's talk long-term. Like the other Firenese characters and early game recruits in Engage, Etie has the unfortunate task of having to measure up to very powerful characters that come later on, and an endgame army deployment slot limit of 14. I would argue that Etie's main competition for the archer slot on your team is Alchrist. However, there are also other potentials, like Fogado, Panette, perhaps even Saphir, and so on. Etie's main draws are twofold. First is her availability, with her being a unit that you can and probably will rely on starting from Chapter 3, right out of the gate and fresh out of the tutorial chapters. Her impressive focus on strength is her second draw, since by the time you recruit even later game characters, there's a good chance she may already have more strength than them at that point if you invested in her. I'm specifically talking about Alchrist and Fogado here, whose base strengths upon recruitment are pretty laughable compared to Etie's. In Engage, characters have innate proficiencies, which allow them when using particular weapon types they're good at, to sometimes be able to wield that type at one rank higher in certain classes. Thus, in a class balanced to only be able to use C-rank bows, for example, like Warrior, a unit like Etie will have the ability to wield up to B-rank bows, opening the door to further possibilities for her in the class than other characters. It isn't always the biggest deal, but it provides even more incentive to have characters stick with what they're good at. Point blank, Etie likes bows, and does them better than most. She is far from the typical weak early game archer. The 4 characters with innate bow proficiency in Engage are Etie, Alchrist, Fogado, and Anna, making them the best bets for any archer-based class since they get that little extra pizzazz. A character doesn't need to have innate proficiency, but expect to allow yourself more weapon potential and increased variety with the units that do. Let's talk about Alchrist. When Alchrist joins in Chapter 7, he will typically have worse strength than Etie, but better HP, dexterity, defense, and speed. He also has the distinct benefit of being a royal character, and as such, he gets his own unique personal class, Tirade d'Elite, which translates to marksman. With it, he gets the Luna skill, a very powerful exclusive skill that allows him to chew through enemies' defenses, that can even proc multiple times through things like the Lin Ring's multi-attack Astrostorm. Etie can't get Luna. No one else can. But Alcryst typically suffers from far worse strength than Etie. In fact, for a unit recruited 4 chapters later, Alcryst comes with 1 point of strength higher than Etie at base, at 6 levels higher than her base level. Meaning that if you actually used Etie in the 4 chapters before he showed up, her strength is likely to blow his out of the water. Fogado also has a similar problem in this area, boasting incredible speed, but being recruited in Chapter 12, where he, again, has just a single point higher than Alchryst's base strength in Chapter 7, so 2 points higher than Chapter 3 Etie's strength. Etie is the strongest archer in Engage in terms of raw strength. It's the reason to use her. Alchryst's strength growth is also a bit worse than Etie's at 30% too, and because of this, in a lot of cases, Alcryst might not be doing very much damage at all later on, depending on your level ups, and might even be required to gamble on crits or Luna procs to actually be able to take down enemies. Sure, he'll double much more often than Etie will, but if he's too weak to actually do much damage, it's not going to get you far. Alcryst has a very solid dexterity stat though, and he'll likely crit much more often than Etie will because of this, but again, you'll be relying more on luck than actual raw damage. Seeing how much you'll do in the forecast is going to be much clearer and much more consistent with Etie, even if she's only getting 1 shot in. But you could always just use them both, as archers are great in this game, and having more than 1 bow user, in my opinion, is a necessity, especially for certain challenging maps. They're both good in different ways. I would also argue that Etie's true capabilities lie elsewhere from Alcryst. For example, in the warrior class. Alcryst has a preferred class that gives him Luna. It's always going to be a hard sell to want to make him anything other than his Tira Delete class, since he loses that amazing class skill and its other benefits. Etie doesn't have this problem. The warrior class is one of the best classes in Engage, period. You get the ability to use pretty powerful high might axes, chain attacks as a backup type character, which are essential for whittling down tough enemies on higher difficulties, and you also get to further extend your chain attack range by having the ability to equip a longbow. Warrior is the only backup class that can wield bows. This means you can have your warrior run up to enemies first and place them in such a way that they'll be able to target multiple foes up to 3 tiles away, giving you more chain attacks on more enemies for when your other allies enter combat after that first move. This is incredibly useful. Typically, characters in this class are only able to use up to steel bows and longbows, but given Etie's innate bow proficiency, she can go up to B rank and use silver bows for even more damage. In my maddening run, I also had Etie running around with a brave axe that certainly came in handy several times. But because of her high strength, she can also pack a wallop for enemies easily with many different types of axes. Give her at least 1. Warrior also gives Etie a solid 15% increase to her speed growth, landing her at 50%. This will help to patch up her speed over time, and is one of the few classes to do so quite this well. On your first time through maddening mode, you'll be forced to have fixed growths, meaning level ups are not random, and this will also guarantee her a point in speed every 2 levels. You could also just ignore her speed issues by giving her the Lin Ring like I mentioned, but that's more of a commitment that you'd have to consider. Other solid classes that I'd recommend for Etie would be Bow Knight, though she will take a bit of her hit to her base strength, which stinks, but it will however grant her even more mobility, the growth modifiers are decent in this class, and she gets a nice boost to her res potential, which may allow her to tank enemy mages better. But of course, you do lose the opportunity to be a backup character with the longbow, unless you give her the Lucina Ring for Dual Assist Plus. You get to make one character an extra backup with the Lucina Ring in your group, so you have to choose wisely with it. Chain attack damage is calculated based on a character's base HP, so for example 30 HP equals 3 damage chain attacks, 40 equals 4 damage, etc. So be sure that if you do go this route, this Etie and Bow Knight has plenty of HP to be hitting those strong chain attacks with. Otherwise, someone else will be best with the Lucina Ring. I'm not going to touch on her interaction with every single ring in this video, as it would take way too long, but another one that's worth noting is that Etie puts in work with the Sigurd Ring. Her long range with bows, plus extreme movement from the ring, and also the ability to absolutely destroy enemy cavaliers with her huge strength and Sigurd's Rider's Bane, is a really fun combination. Something to keep in mind, perhaps. Sniper can be done well here too, and Etie appreciates the extra crit of the class skill, since her dex isn't amazing, and it also allows her to be a covert unit and take advantage of cover from thicket, forests, and pillars, but I don't think it's the objectively best pick for several reasons. It does continue on where Archer leaves off, improving the growth slightly, and Etie gets a cool custom tiger-like color scheme, but again, you don't get backup status. There's no extra movement here either, and her speed can still be fixed better by other classes if that's something that you're trying to do. Etie will also be quite frail defensively, and not as great of a dodge tank as other characters by default. This, plus her speed issues, can make her a potential sitting duck, even when she is in cover. Like for most physical units, Wyvern Knight is a solid class pick here too, which further bolsters her strength growth potential, alongside freedom of movement over ledges, water, and other inhibitive terrain. It doesn't do as much to patch up her speed growth, but 40% isn't the end of the world either. If you're really hurting for the extra mobility or need a replacement for someone else, she can totally make this work, but enemy archers are aplenty in this game to a pretty inhibitive degree, and placed really strategically on maps, so it will be hard for her to swoop in and attack safely a lot of the time. You will largely always have to watch her back. Flyers also don't get to take advantage of terrain effects, especially like the really useful dragon veins granted by the Corrin ring, such as fog, which is amazing, and this continues to make flying classes even harder to defend and keep safe, especially later in the game and on higher difficulties. Paladin is another great choice where you really can't go wrong if you just need a solid frontline unit, and you don't mind disregarding bows and her bow proficiency. The growth rate modifiers here help her very solidly and round her out well. Paladins as a class do have the capability to wield S-rank weapons if the character has proficiency in lances, axes, or swords, and is obviously in the correct corresponding Paladin class, but because Etie's proficiency is in bows, she won't be able to here. S-rank weapons are good, but they're also not totally necessary, and they're quite expensive to invest in. In fact, by the time they even show up, you should have good old reliable weaker weapons that you forged up and engraved, and will still probably prefer to use those most of the time because of that. So her lack of S ranks in Paladin is fine, I think. Etie could also make a solid hero as well, but it does hurt to lose out on using longbows for the extra effective range of her chain attacks. Though her getting double chain attacks through Brave Assist will always be good too. But again, it also won't really take advantage of her high strength stat, since chain attacks are calculated using a character's max HP. You'd want to ensure that she had solid HP for the extra chain attack damage, and 60% HP growth isn't the highest, but again, it is an option if you need a hero. As far as skill recommendations go, this is pretty standard here, but with some extra emphasis on speed. And you can also go for extra hit with bow focus or hit plus, Vantage if her strength is high enough to potentially counter-kill enemies that come to attack her, bow agility if you are trying to make her more of a dodge tank, and speed taker if you're not giving her the Lin ring would be ideal. Oh, and pretty much everyone appreciates having canter, so get used to hearing that if you haven't already. So to recap, Etie can excel at just about any physical class. Her solid base 40% strength growth ensures that she'll be one of the stronger units in your army in terms of offense. Certain classes can help to patch up her somewhat lacking speed potential, or you can patch it up by giving her the Lin ring. Overall, I think Warrior boasts her best potential, combining what she's already good at, patching up her growth rates, and further expanding upon her potential than most other fits and most other characters in the class. Etie is a great unit on any difficulty. She enters your army early in the game and is immediately useful, and is definitely worthy of being considered for your playthroughs. If you'd like to grab yourself copies of the handy reference images I created for this video, check out the link in the video description. Thank you for watching, get subscribed for more, and I'll catch you next time.